Great. Thanks a lot, everybody. So JB and I are having a drink last night, and I'm telling him, writing a book is about as close as a guy can come to giving birth to a child, because it takes about 9 months, and you get to this stage of it, you just want it to come out. You just want it to be free, to go out, everybody read it, and hopefully everybody think it's an attractive baby, not that Seinfeld episode where people look at it and they say, that's an ugly baby. So you'll give us the feedback after of what you think of our baby. But the reason the three of us took such a big block out of our lives for 9 months to write this book is when business models shift, they have profound consequences. You stick to the old business model too long, and you have a Kodak moment. You get stuck with a film camera business model, assets, capabilities, when the world has gone digital. You get on the front end and you lead in a new business model shift, and you have an Apple moment. What they did with iTunes, which was much more important than the iPod itself, was really a cloud-based business model that reinvented the music industry, reset the price points, and so on. So the reason we wrote this book, it's kind of simple, is we thought no one had put together a playbook for what would the things you do today if you wanted to have more of an Apple moment than a Kodak moment. And I'll start with this, which is there's a lot of money at stake. So this is a Forrester number. Forrester estimates the total cloud market, including infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service today, is $40 billion a year. And that in 10 years, 2020, it'll be $240 billion a year. That's an extra $200 billion a year of revenue for somebody. That's 2 new IBMs or 5 new Oracles or 200 new CompuWares, right? So there probably isn't another disruptive trend that's anywhere near that in magnitude that could create entirely new big technology businesses. But it's kind of a blessing and a curse. So there's a version of this which is the blessing, which we kind of call the happy cloud. It's got light rays that stream down through it. It's big and fluffy. It all sounds good. And that's this notion of there's a lot of money up for grabs. If we could just get our fair share, we'd all be pretty happy, frankly. $200 billion is a lot of money for even big companies like Cisco and IBM and Oracle and SAP. But there's also a version of the cloud which is much more about dark and stormy weather. Because what Forrester didn't write about when they said there's an extra $200 billion to go get is it's not additive. A lot of that extra $200 billion is coming from other markets in technology that already exists. And what you're starting to see in cloud right now is you're starting to see some real sniping going on between the folks that are competing for that business. So this is kind of topical. This was 3 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday, the week of Oracle World, and on Twitter, Mark Benioff basically tweets saying, sorry, but I don't know why. Larry just canceled my keynote for tomorrow. Mark Benioff was supposed to keynote the Oracle World conference. He kind of got unceremoniously disinvited on 24 hours notice. You saw the next day why, as Larry stands up on stage, and this is a quote from Larry, which is, the Salesforce cloud is kind of like the Roach Motel. You fly in and you can never get out. And many of you have seen this morning, Oracle bought right now for $1.5 billion to really get into cloud for the customer service part of the business in a much, much bigger way than they have historically been. So the fact, that's kind of the dark, stormy cloud version of this, which is there's a lot of money up for grabs, and a lot of it is share shift. A lot of it is money that's shifting from one category of tech to potentially another category of tech, and it's going to get quite contentious. And you saw 3 years ago, almost to the day, the CEO, former CEO of SAP basically say, you know what? I got to slow down my cloud offer. It's actually the uptake might be too fast for my shareholders because it may be too disruptive to my margins if we let business by design go out faster rather than slower. So those are the pressures that kind of caused us to want to write the book. And the playbook aspect of this is really structured around 7 what we call new rules that I'll walk you through. The first one is the one that JB mentioned, which is there's a risk shift going on from risk on the customer's side of the ledger to risk on our side of the ledger, the tech vendor's side of the ledger that's inherent in cloud. And that customers are quite happy about, and that many of you may find difficult to deal with your current business models. So I'm sure you're all as strong as this guy that's holding up the rock. You've all got deep installed bases. You've got great brands. You've got world-class teams, both management teams and frontline teams. But you're up against something which is profound in our industry. JB already showed you this chart, which is all of us made money in this model. At the time that when I ran the product businesses at Symbol Technologies out on Long Island, we made all of our money on this model. It was all CapEx. It was all up front. And what was the thing, when we won a big deal, what was the first thing we did? We got a voicemail from the CEO or a voicemail from me out to the team saying, way to go, we got a big deal. We won a $70 million deal with Nestle and a $90 million deal with UPS to put mobile handhelds in every UPS truck on the planet. And as the vendor, you celebrate that because a lot of that money, as JB said, is guaranteed up front. It's coming in the bank account, and at the point of signing that contract, you have reason to celebrate. What kind of voicemail do you think went around inside the customer organization on the day that they signed the deal? Kind of like, holy crap, my badge is on the table. I just signed up for a lot of money with a vendor, and I've kind of put my badge on the table saying, we're not just going to get availability out of that technology, we're actually going to get adoption of the technology by our end users, and we're going to get business value from the technology after the end users adopt. So this asymmetry between the voicemail that might have gone around inside the tech company, the high fives that went around at the deal signing point when 70% of the money was committed, and what the voicemail was that probably went around inside the customer's organization, which wasn't high fives. It was like, now the real work begins. What we're seeing with cloud, and this is the first trend, is this movement to lots of small dots. So if there's one thing you remember from my part of the presentation, I'd love you to kind of have this visual of, we need to learn to love the small dots in high tech because there's going to be a lot more of them. There's going to be a lot less money up front, 100% committed in these deals. A lot fewer high fives, frankly, for all of us, and a lot more dots over time as we move to a consumption-based model, a consumption-based pricing model. It's going to be more similar to what the outsourcers historically, BPO guys and the outsourcers, have had to deal with, which is if the contract's not going well and we're not delivering value, either the contract is over or there's a renegotiation that happens along the way. So that difference between a lot of money up front, maybe 70% of the money up front, or versus an OpEx model or cloud-based model of 10% of the money up front, is really a risk shift. It's shifting risk to the technology company that used to be borne wholly and completely by the customer. The second big shift, and this we really spoke about last year in Complexity Avalanche, is that we really do believe simplicity will be king. We really do believe that simplicity at the end of the day is going to win the business. And this is a big behavioral shift in how technology is bought. Good enough is truly becoming good enough. Customers are embracing simplicity. And this idea that our engineers push out every possible function point that they can dream up to our customers and are incredibly proud of it. The speeds and feeds go up. I'm incredibly proud of the 50 new features that my next-gen product has. That product playbook, we think that's kind of run its course. And a lot of the margins that JB showed you for product-based technology companies, it really holds up, is that playbook has been run too long and it's kind of out of gas. Now, we'd all hope for this visual, right? So simple, even a child could do it, right? And the reality is, this is the visual that we usually get, which is, I am so fed up that I've called you 10 times and told you this thing doesn't work, so I've stabbed my computer, basically. And it's not just limited to enterprise technology. If you look at consumer technology, I bought a Lexus a couple years ago, an LS. It came with a 650-page owner's manual. That did not include the separate owner's manual for the entertainment system or the separate one for the maintenance schedule that the car required, right? Our firm, TCG, we just upgraded the next version of IP phones a little while ago. I won't tell you the vendor. I will tell you that it came with an incredibly cool color screen and I'm sure like 50 new features that my old analog Polycom phone could not do. What it didn't come with was a button that said hold on it. For those of you that own this particular brand of IP phone, the hold is a hand, which of course wasn't intuitive to me. I think they took speak to the hand just a little bit too literally, you know. I didn't get it, so I was trying to put a client on hold and I couldn't find the button. It's an example of this. It's an example of overshoot, technology overshoot, where our engineers just overshoot good enough. They change things that don't need to get changed, or they layer in so many new features and so many capabilities that they miss the fact that unless it's usable, unless it's so simple that a child could use it, that it's not really going to get adopted by the end users we would seek to have adopt. And if the end users don't adopt, we're not going to get the money that we wanted to, which is the next new rule, which is at the end of the day, end users are going to be what drives technology decisions in a much more profound way than they ever have. So there's a bit of a power to the people aspect to this in terms of how you're going to have to sell those little blue dots going forward. So again, a visual sometimes helps. This is the classic enterprise sales model for IT, which is basically a lot of kind of medium-sized blue dots that are typically direct sales force in parallel with our channel partners go out and try to win. And it doesn't matter whether you're playing at the infrastructure layer like a NetApp or a Cisco, or you're playing at the platform layer like an Oracle, or you're playing at the software layer like an Oracle or an SAP. You basically fought for these blue dots. You sold to central IT. You talked to as many line of business folks as you needed to, but really you were trying to sell to the IT folks. And the big change we're seeing is this shift towards the end users starting to actually take a much more direct control over their consumption, where you're seeing a bunch of these dots migrate up, if you will, up to the end users. So cloud enables individual departments or individual functions in companies to effectively go around their IT organizations and say, you know what, I know you guys want to do this with your traditional vendors, but you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go with a different vendor who I believe can meet our needs. And that's, I had some personal experience with this. So at Symbol, we had a big project with a major ERP vendor to put it in across the board. We put in their CRM application for our sales force. We spent $20 million to design it, install it. We had salespeople involved. We had channel people involved. And we got to go live. And we effectively, the little dots, we effectively had a mutiny. It was so complicated to use. It was taking so much time from our salespeople to get their pipelines into that tool that 3 months after go live, we wrote it off. In a public technology company, we wrote off $20 million. We went to Salesforce.com, and 3 months later, we had their app up, and it worked just fine. And the company's been on Salesforce ever since. That's a great example. Was our IT group basically had a certain model that they wanted to install, and Salesforce did an incredible job. They went to our head of sales, and they said, I know you're dealing with this pain, and I can solve your pain, and it'll be much, much more simple. So that's this notion of end users are getting a much, much greater say in technology decisions than they ever have, at least in my professional career. Number 4 is also about your go-to-market and who you're going to sell to, which is really around this role that customer aggregators are going to play in cloud. And we're seeing this in both. So at one level, your markets are going to fragment. You're going to have many more sell-tos, if you think about it, department by department or end-user function by end-user function. At the other extreme, you're seeing a set of customer aggregators play a role in cloud where they're really starting to aggregate the market, and they're shrinking the number of blue dots that exist. So if we continue with that same picture, there's still some blue dots in IT to go sell to. But the other big trend that we're seeing is a shift where you've got customer aggregators, what we would call cloud service providers, are increasingly playing a role where they're aggregating many, many customers at scale, and they're saying, let me provide your cloud infrastructure, let me provide your cloud applications. And if you're an OEM, like many of you are in this room, that can be a very difficult thing. Because at the end of the day, the service level agreement that's made with those end users is going to be made by the cloud service provider. If it's consumer, it's probably Amazon or Google or maybe Apple, if you're in consumer tech. If you're in enterprise tech, maybe it's an AT&T or it's an IBM or it's a Rackspace or a managed hosting company. But they're going to try to aggregate many, many customers, many, many small dots. And then, of course, the thing they're going to do is they're going to go to each of you OEMs in the room, and they're going to say, I'm subject to this OpEx purchase model from my customers. I want you to feel my pain. I want you to share my pain. I'd like you to participate with me and put some skin in the game to help me serve my customers. Of course, what that means is a commoditization of your value add at some level, because if you're IBM and you're working with an end user customer, do you really care what brand the infrastructure equipment is that sits behind you? If you're IBM, the end customer probably doesn't care as long as IBM's meeting the service level. you probably don't care so much what the core infrastructure is that it runs, as long as it meets the service level agreement that IBM has struck with their customer. So this, JB mentioned, this kind of cloud could be up, cloud could be down, and it's going to be a mix for different companies. This is a particularly important one for you to understand, which is for your particular market, what role are these customer aggregators going to play, these big service providers that are going to host large cloud infrastructure? That's rule 4. Rule 5, this is about route to market. So what role is your channel going to play? And here we really do think it's kind of a tale of two worlds, which is at the one side, you've got global systems integrators, and kind of at the other side, you've got these VARs and resellers, typically of quite smaller size of company. You know, at Symbol, we had 30% direct, 70% indirect, so we really went to market through a channel-based approach. And it's kind of a tale of two channels. Is if you're a global SI, it's actually mostly upside for you, because you basically say, well, I'm going to enable vertical business processes in the cloud. I'm going to do quote to cash, end to end, and I might actually host all the applications and all the infrastructure required for that, and I might become a cloud aggregator, a cloud service provider myself, and have a data center network where I host all of that infrastructure required. And I probably play this role of many companies have kind of taken a baby step towards cloud of what they call a private cloud, right? An internal virtualized infrastructure with their data centers, but not really leveraging the full benefit of a public cloud. We think the global SIs are going to play a role of helping those big companies get from that private cloud environment to a public cloud environment. So there's probably actually a lot of upside for the global SIs in the room. But if you're a VAR or a reseller, how much resale is there in cloud? Because a lot of this stuff will be hosted, a lot of this stuff will be whoever the cloud service provider is, or potentially the OEM. There's not a lot of kind of install it, you know, configure it on site, kind of customize at work anymore. And there's certainly not a lot of resale, staging and resale kind of business. So it's a little bit more gloomy. We think there's a lot of VARs and resellers that are going to go away in this world. For the ones that remain, they're really going to focus on kind of consumption-based services, which is what JB will talk about towards the end of this discussion. And they're going to have to shift from this resale-based business model to much more of a fee-for-service business model. They're not going to be able to sustain their businesses on what they historically did, which was charge, you know, kind of a resale type of margins. What that's going to cause is a big reset in the workforce. The number of people they can employ is going to change dramatically. So as you think about your cloud strategy, particularly if you have an indirect go-to-market model, thinking about how cloud is going to affect, how your cloud offers are going to affect your channel is going to be pretty important. So that's new rule number 5. 6, I have to say, is probably the most touchy one. You talk about pricing in an environment like this, you know, macroeconomic environment like this, it's probably the most touchy topic that you can talk about. The reason it's touchy is we have a very limited experience of prices that went down ever going back up, right? I live in Los Gatos, California. That's the home of Netflix. How many Netflix members in the room? Anybody? Yeah? How many of you were really happy with their recent price increase that they pushed through in the summer? No hands? You know, they've had a massive defection because they tried to increase prices for what is effectively a subscription-based service, and they've had a really difficult time in the last few months because they tried to do that. So prices are a little bit like tectonic forces or sedimentary rock, which is once they get pushed down, it's remarkably difficult to bring them back up. And I will say this is the one that we're still speculating a bit. There's so much experimentation going on of what the appropriate model is for pricing offers in the cloud. We're seeing experimentation by the feature, by the seat per month, by the module per seat per month. If you're a networking company, you're experimenting with going to your SP customers and doing per port kind of pricing, which is I'll put the switch or the router in, and you won't pay me until you turn an individual port within that switch on, if you think about it. Kind of like the equivalent of vendor-managed inventory in retail, where CPG companies put inventory into Walmart's distribution center. Walmart doesn't pay them until they actually sell through that inventory. We're starting to see that start to happen in tech, which again, from a balance sheet perspective, is a very difficult thing. And we just pulled out a couple examples. These examples are in the book, but this is right off of Salesforce's website. 3 things to note about their pricing. One is every one of their price offers has a try and buy, has some sort of freemium offer, which is try it free for a certain amount of time, Try that with classic enterprise technology. There really is no way. There was no way for our sales force at Symbol to kind of try this heavyweight CRM approach for free to see if they like it. We had to spend the $20 million to go live before they could really try it at scale. So that's one part of what Salesforce is doing. The second part is just the absolute dollars, right? $100, $125, $65. That's kind of the new price point of what one of those little blue dots is versus a $100,000 software license or a $1 million rack of switching, equipment or a $5 million rack of data center networking or storage equipment, right? And the third piece to remember about this is look at the gap between a basic adopting customer, $5 a month, and a fully adopted customer, an unlimited customer, $250 a month. That's a 5,000% difference between I'm a customer, but I'm testing you, and I'm all in with you, and I want to use every module that you can bring me. And think about our sales cycles. Our sales cycles aren't really tuned to bring a customer on at a low price point and then upgrade them over time to a really high price point, to a price point that's 5,000% of where they started. That's antithetical to most of our sales organizations today, and JB is going to talk a little bit about the role we think services has to play in terms of an account service organization that would be able to lead that upselling that has to happen when you bring customers on at price points that look like this. And if you think the app layer, the application layer, or software as a service layer looks tough, $125 kind of little blue dots, look at the infrastructure one. Instead of $125, it's 125 cents. So you see a double extra large high memory on-demand instance of a Windows box is like $1.24 an hour. So you're talking about really, really, really small dots. So how does this affect your business model? We think this is the profound change that cloud is really going to garner. And at TCG, we've done a bunch of analysis about this. We actually did a benchmarking project for one of our clients in January of this year, January 2011. And we basically found there were three models at play right now in terms of how technology companies were pricing their offers and dealing with this migration. If they mainly sold to IT, they were frankly good with sticking with the CapEx model for a while. And the reason was the IT groups, this is how they budget. They're used to paying CapEx. They're used to paying upfront fees for hardware and software. They kind of have budgets in place to do it, and they're actually quite comfortable with that. So if you mainly can sell to IT and you don't get the rise of the end users or departments or lines of business making decisions, maybe you can stick with that for a little while. We've seen a number that have kind of gone halfway, which is what we would call OpEx subscription, which is I'll use my balance, it's like leasing. I'll use my balance sheet to create some pay over time model for my hardware or for my software, but it's kind of a baby step because there's nothing in that other than time that links to consumption. It's really just how long you've had it is how much you pay me, right? But it's a baby step in that direction. We think eventually all of it's going to the right of this side. It's just a question of time. It's going to vary depending what layer of that stack you play at, but at least within TCG, we've got a pretty clear perspective that eventually it's moving to the right. It's either moving to consumption-based models or it's moving to outcome-based models about business outcomes, and that you're going to have to figure out how do you blend in offers that are priced that way in parallel with still selling a lot of CapEx-based offers, mainly to the central IT group. The further you get to line of business, the further you got to get to the right of this chart. And the last new rule of the 7 is basically the one that I think figures out, well, how do you sell these little blue dots? And that's this notion of behavioral data. The one silver bullet that every company that's either a cloud attacker like a Salesforce or a Taleo, or they're an incumbent in the old model but is dipping their toe in the cloud waters, is actually having detailed behavioral data at the end user level, module by module, of how they use the technology. And that is the silver bullet because it leads to a model, again, this is kind of a TCG model, that we call the 4-gear model, which is most of the companies that are winning in cloud today are actually only firing, this is why you're not too far behind if you're not in yet, they're only firing on 2 of these gears, the acquisition gear and the monetization gear, which is I'll acquire a lot of customers to my cloud-based offer and I'll figure out a way to monetize them, which is I'll figure out a way to upsell them. What they're missing is the ability to get the other 2 gears to really go, which is this engagement gear and then the virality gear, because this is how you're going to sell the little blue dots at scale with a cost structure from a cost of sales perspective that actually works. So the engagement gear is, can you imagine a world of enterprise technology where it sees your behavior pattern of how you've used the technology, and the system itself proactively suggests new ways that you could use the tool better in the workflow, not something that's an education training course that you have to take outside of the system or something that someone has to come and tell you what to do, but the system itself says, a bunch of other users that have used the modules you've used have found this fifth module to be really highly effective for their productivity. Why don't you try it? Click here, right? Now, the monetization engine can kick in and say, well, if you click here, there's a small upcharge that's like the Salesforce model. There's a small upcharge where there's another module to be had. But if you think of selling the small dots, that's an automated way to do it. Even more powerful is the virality gear, which is how do you start to get your customers to sell on your behalf? How do you start to profile your end user community in a way that you get to identify what the new power users are, and you start to activate them to get their peers to use your solutions in a very different way, whether that's a network engineer if you're an infrastructure player, or whether that's a departmental level user if you're a departmental level player. And that's getting all four of these gears working is really what we think is kind of the punchline of this, which is that's the thing cloud gives you never had, which is you actually have real live data about how your systems are being used in a way that you've never had in the old CapEx-based models. So these are the 7 new rules. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in the book about each of the 7. We don't have time to kind of go into more detail now, but I will say this is what we've debated internally amongst Thomas and JB and I, which is if all of those are at play, we think they help you figure out, is it the dark, stormy cloud for you, or is it the light, fluffy cloud for you? Is it more upside, which is, yeah, maybe prices fall a bit, but there's so many customers I couldn't previously serve with my high complexity, high price model that there's actually a bunch of latent demand I've never actually served before, and I got to go get that, and that's what's going to increase the size of the market. And overall, while each customer I may make a little less money, overall my revenues and my margin are going to go up? Or is it mostly downside for you? Is it mostly Salesforce is going to take my customers, or Taleo is going to take my customers, or the company in my industry that comes out, my part of the industry that comes out with a new cloud-based offer is actually going to take share from me, so prices are going to fall and my market share is going to fall? And I think we wanted to put these new rules out there as a way for you to think about which of those two realities is it going to be. So this is where, I'm going to hand it back to JB, because this is where we basically want to help you think about what role does a services organization play in terms of helping the overall company become what we call masters of consumption instead of masters of complexity. So please help me welcome JB back to the stage.